Good evening. I will calling to order the Ross Valley School District Board of Trustees meeting for Tuesday, May 31st, and it is 6:20 p.m. All participating staff and all of our trustees are here this evening in person at the Ross Valley School District office. The meeting is being live streamed as we speak. So there will be a recording available within 72 hours of the meeting. And for all of us up here at the table, remember that these microphones are super sensitive, so our scruffling papers and squeaking chairs all get caught on the recording. Our first order of business today is a closed session with let's see, what do we have? Two items on our closed session. So those, right. So the closed items today are the public employee evaluation for our superintendent and conference with legal counsel on anticipated litigation for government code section 54956.9E1. One case. After we're done, we will reconvene in open session at 7 o'clock. It's now 6:21. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are reconvening in open session after having just been in closed session. It is now 7:14. And we are reconvened in open session. Very happy to see you all here this evening. Before we get into the heart of the meeting and hear from you all, we have a few more procedural items. One of those procedural items, as I mentioned, is just to welcome you and to note that we're gathered here in the district office for the meeting of the Ross Valley School District Board of Trustees on May 31st, Tuesday, May 31st. And as we're all gathered here in person at the district office, I want to start by acknowledging that we're located on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok people of present-day Marin and southern Sonoma counties, and that we honor with gratitude the land itself and all of its ancestors, past, present, and emerging. So thank you for being here in our district office today. I also wanted to just take a moment of reflection, which we often do before we say the Pledge of Allegiance. And this week is a little bit difficult to think about our moment of democracy before we say our Pledge of Allegiance. And I was having a hard time thinking about what to say, because I usually try and say something inspiring or talk about this month. But it's been a difficult couple of weeks. So I just wanted to read a couple lines of poetry from the National Youth Poet Laureate. And one of the reasons why we have poet laureates and we have artists in residence in our civil society is to help say things that are going on for us in our communities and in our world that are sometimes difficult to think about to say. So I just wanted to read a few lines of a poem that was written by our National Poet Laureate, Amanda Gorman, over the last couple of weeks. She just wrote this poem. And a couple of lines. May we not just grieve, but give. May we not just ache, but act. May our signed right to bear arms never blind our sight from shared harm. May we choose our children over chaos. May another innocent never be lost. Maybe everything hurts, our hearts shadowed and strange, but only when everything hurts, may everything change. And with that idea that we have the power to make change, let's say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You guys ready? 1, 2, 3. pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next procedural item is to adopt the agenda and the time allocations.
So moved.
Hold on a second, I think we need to rearrange.
Just reorder the items under presentation. So number 4 goes to number 1 and then everything else just moves down. There are 4 items in that section.
Okay. All right, so we are just
So full 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
4, 1, 2, 3 on item number F.
Yep.
All right,
Okay with that.
any other questions or amendments? Nope.
So moved. As amended.
We have a motion
And second?
and a second. All right. We're gonna vote on that. Ryan?
Aye.
Marie?
Aye.
Shelley? Aye. Rachel?
Aye.
Wesley?
Aye.
All right. We have our agenda set. The meeting can begin. Okay. Which means that we will move on to our student presentation.
Tips report on closed session.
No, not
Right
yet.
after.
Thank you. So we're gonna move on to our student presentations, and Marcy, do you wanna introduce?
Sure, just so excited tonight to have all of you from Manor School. Who's excited to be here? Yeah, excited you're here. Excellent. All right, and thank you to all the parents and guardians and friends who brought the children today. It's especially exciting. And I think I'll let it open with Ms. Minicozy, who would like to introduce this topic.
Sure.
Principal, thank
So
you.
yes, we are very excited to be here today. We only had one day of rehearsal, so bear with us. But the children are going to share some of their projects from open house. So we just had open house a couple Wednesdays ago, and it was a great success, and they're excited to share with you. So take it away, Julia. Nice and loud, guys.
Good evening. My name is Julia Harwood and I am in 3rd grade at Manor School. We are here tonight to share with you some of our projects from our annual open house. First, you will hear from 1st graders, Kunsel and Seychelle, who will share one of our social justice and equity book bundle book projects. Hi, my name is Kunsel. And my name is Seychelle. Mrs. Skelton read us the book called My Name is a Song. We talked about how we got our name and what makes each of our names unique. The author was trying to teach us that names are very special. I got my name Kunsel from the Dalai Lama. I got my name Seychelles from an island off the coast of East Africa. Here is how our names sound in a song.
Unfortunately, I couldn't get it to play, but their teacher did something really neat. There was a website where you could upload the children's name, and it creates an actual song. So each child in her class has a song about their name that they can play.
Great. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Go give it to them so they can
Yes.
ask.
Yeah.
Seychelles.
Yeah, let's give it to Thank you.
Next, you will hear from Kai Shu and Ruby Tanamachi, 3rd graders from Miss Cole's class. We read a book called Drawn Together. It's about a boy and his grandfather. The boy gets dropped off at his grandfather's house by his mom, but the grandfather and the boy speak 2 different languages, and they try to have a conversation, but it doesn't really work. So they figure out a new and creative way to connect other than words. They connect through drawings, and they kind of like make their own world out of it. I really like this book because of all the drawings in it and how they created their own world, not by using words, and the whole time and they were just speechless. And yeah. The social justice standard that this book teaches us is I feel connected to other people and know how to talk, work, and play with others, even when we are different or when we disagree. Next, we have Anuga Smart Butcho, Camila Gomez Next, we have Anubis Marpacho, Camila Gomez Escalante, and David Jefferson Zaccaro from Miss Ford's 4th grade class.
Bonita Salado is a bird project we have been studying all year, and there are 10 birds. There are 10 birds that migrate from Marin County and to Jalisco, Mexico. We also wrote to pen pals in Mexico who were also studying these birds. We made scientific drawings of the birds and wrote poems in both English and Spanish. We will read our poems in English and Spanish from the book we published as a class.
Mi pájaro vuela tan alto que podría llegar a la luna. Tiene la cabeza amarilla igual que el sol. Tiene las alas negras y amarillas. Se para en una rama, canta. Tiene las patas negras igual que la noche. Canta alegremente para nosotros.
When I was a Lizantine bunting, I was so colorful. I had colors like blue, light blue, orange, black, and white. I loved flying in the sky. I felt like I was dreaming and alive. Same with my friends. We are dreaming and we are alive. Now I know I'm here and this is me. From this project, we've learned a lot of science, but we also learn about the importance of value in different cultures and languages and making new friends with people from different places.
Yeah.
And finally, we would like to showcase 2 of our expedition culminating projects. The first grade students have 2 expeditions throughout the school year. What's in the sky and what makes Fairfax great?
And one of our students, Aliana, I don't think she's here. So Addie, take it away.
For our study of space, we each wrote and illustrated a book about space. Mine was Mars. We also wrote reviews of our favorite places in Fairfax. My favorite place in Fairfax is the Hill Library Park.
You want to read a little of your book?
Mars has a lot of planets. It's the 4th planet from the sun. It is sometimes called the red planet because of its red surface. Mars is a planet in the solar system. The journey to Mars would take 1 year. There are 2 moons on Mars. 1 Mars day is called a day. Thank you for listening to our presentation tonight. Do you have any questions for us?
Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. Who knows this book? Any of you guys, have you seen this project? Like, have you seen any of the birds personally that are in this book? Or were they just pictures that you saw and followed them? Have you ever seen some of these birds?
Oh,
No, we only see them in pictures.
What was one thing that you were really excited about in working on one of your projects? A moment that you were like, oh, this is awesome.
Getting to talk about the book.
That's great. Anyone else?
How great is this?
Well, thank you for sharing.
Really appreciate it. Yep.
I liked how we wrote the poems for the Amigos Alados.
How did you write those poems?
Well, first we had to learn about our bird, and then after we had to one of Miss Accord's helpers helped us out make the poems by just learning the bird and telling us how it acts and everything.
Yeah. Kind of how to bring the poetry and the science together to do that. Interesting.
It's by far my favorite part of all the meetings.
Oh, yeah.
By a lot. And it reminds us why we do
Well,
what we
this is a
do.
great book.
Is to see this kind of stuff. This is really
This
fantastic.
is a great book.
We really do appreciate you coming in and talking to us and showing us what you're
Great.
doing and what you're excited about and all of the different projects that you're working on.
Very good drawing as well.
Thank you.
All right, and what we would love for you to do is come up and take a picture with the trustees. Do you want to do that?
Oh, don't forget the pencils.
We will do that. Oh, sorry. And we would love to hear who you brought tonight. So will you
Yes,
each
we'd like to
introduce
see.
yourselves and tell us who you brought or who brought you this evening? Who you came with. You mind doing that?
Let's start down here.
All right, you want to?
I'm Juliet Harwood, and my mom is over there, and she took me.
Good. Thank you.
What's your
Mom.
mom's name?
Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Inviting the kids today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
My mom and dad and my sister got.
All right, are they here in the room? Well, let's introduce them. Where are they?
They're over there, and their names are Shamini and Charles.
Nice to see you. Is your sister in school yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, what grade?
And TK.
TK. All right.
TK.
Excellent.
Woohoo, TK.
My name is Pencil, and my brother and my mom are right over
Hello.
Okay.
Hello, brother.
What is their name?
there. Miguel and Shamini.
All right. Does your brother go to Manor too? Yes. What grade?
Second and third.
Second and third. Very
All right,
good.
Very
All
nice.
right.
My name is Kai, and my mom, my dad, and my sister brought me Lily.
And out here. What is their name?
James, Elizabeth, and Layla.
Nice to meet everybody.
Well done.
Thank you.
My name is Ruby Tanamachi, and my dad's right there, my sister's right there, and my mom's right
There we go. Just behind you. Nice to meet you.
there. Jared, Jade, and Erica.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Camila Gomez, and my mom and my sister wrote me.
We're gonna ask their names too.
What's their name?
That's what we're gonna ask you.
My sister is Marilyn, and my mom is Yesenia.
Okay. Nice to meet everybody.
My name is Anubis Morguecho, and my mom and dad are over there.
Hello.
And Maria y Alfredo.
Nice.
Nice to meet you.
That's you.
Well, yeah.
¿Cómo te
My
llamas?
name is David. My mom is David.
What are their names?
Gladys and John.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
And my parents are over there, and their names are Baby and Noah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. Let's get the picture.
Maybe next
Hey,
time.
can we have a piece of candy? We'll have-
Yes.
we'll have a piece of candy. Sorry for
Yes.
that. Take one.
Is it yours?
Everyone can have a piece of candy.
Here.
You want. Hey, make sure your sister gets one. If you brought a sibling, have a piece of candy. Terrific.
Yeah.
You want. Chris has candy too.
Here we go.
Get some. Yes.
As everyone files out.
Yeah.
Okay, bring this back.
We're gonna bring it back to order.
Bang, Gavin's,
Oh, yeah.
Blank. All right.
Listening online.
All right, back to the unruly room.
Bye.
Yeah, we have one person left, so welcome. Yes, we will continue on now with the rest of our meeting. Do we need to do,
Now it's report out from.
report out from open
Closed session.
to closed session? Oh, right, there's
I think-
public items. Okay, report out from closed session, which we don't have anything, there was no decision items on the closed session, so there's nothing to report out as far as a decision item on that. And the next item is public comment regarding items not on the agenda. Does our one community member have anything they want to make a comment on that's not on the agenda? Nope. Okay. So we have no public comment on non-agenda items, and now we are on to board announcements. So these are any announcements of related stuff happening that's not a committee? Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
So Wednesday last week, I got to go see the 7th and 8th grade band and orchestra concert. And it was great because there was a lovely celebration of all the 8th graders who are moving on up to high school. So you got to hear all of the work that they've done and the kids who stuck it out through COVID and stayed with the music. And so that was really special. And then Thursday, I went to the 5th and 6th grade band concert. And the same thing, I was really proud of those kids for sticking it out and choosing music. And it was great to see how many 5th graders were there. And so it was just exciting to watch. It was fun. And I'm really proud of what the teachers have accomplished with those kids. So.
And that was again where the 5th graders go to White Hills. So
Yeah, so it's the 5th and 6th grade, and they
coming.
played together for the first time ever, and they sounded great. So it was exciting.
Cool. Anything else? No.
Thank you for Rachel to go and
Appreciate that.
and yeah.
Kids
through those
and
things.
music.
Correspondence and communication of the board. We don't,
We do not. have
nothing
any
came in this afternoon, okay? So we don't have any of that, and we can then move on to presentation and action items. So we are moving number 4 up to number 1, which is discussion of lease extension for the Fairfax San Anselmo Children's Center. And I believe, you want to put that over next to you, since I knocked it off. And then you guys can get our legal counsel on the phone.
While we are bringing our legal counsel on the phone, I did want to discuss that we did have this on the agenda as an action item at the May 10th board meeting. And what precipitated that was that in March there was a conversation between the Fairfax San Anselmo Children's Center and the district where they were requesting
Hold on 1 second, let's
I think
not
we may have
disrupt
him.
you with the ring.
I think he may be on the line.
Okay.
Where we had either a 4-year lease extension
Yep.
or a letter of intent to lease the facilities for 4 years, because at that particular time, the Fairfax San Anselmo Children's Center was looking at seeking a grant to do some facilities work. And so at that particular juncture, it did lead the district to reach out to district council because it involved a new lease potentially, and that is where Terry Tao from Tao Rossini comes in, and Mr. Tao was at the May 10th meeting as well via phone, and we have Mr. Tao on the line right now as well. So Terry, are you there?
I am on the line, yes.
Thank you. Any
All right.
other context for Terry?
No, I think Chris said it. Terry, could you hear Chris's intro to the item?
I did hear the intro, so let me just give some quick background. I apologize if I'm repeating anything, but my understanding is that on March 17th, there was a request for a lease extension extension for the purposes of applying for the California Department of Social Services infrastructure grant. It's what's called, I believe it's SB 170, SB 170 grant. After our last board meeting, I had identified a number of issues that I suggested that I go over in more detail with the folks over at the San Anselmo Fairfax Child Care Center. And we had an opportunity to meet with Heidi Tomsky and a board member on Monday, May 23rd, about a week ago. We had a little trouble scheduling the meeting. It took about a week or so to schedule, but we were able to get together. And during that meeting, I explained that the grant actually has some footnotes which have a number of requirements for code upgrades, meeting access requirements, prevailing wage law applicability, and the most important of which is the compliance with state and federal statutes and regulations. We went over some of the problems that were identified. So I should give just a little bit of context to the Deer Park building itself. It is built on 5.79 acres. It was built between 1950 and 1952, as I understand. At that time, it was built pursuant to what's called Field Act requirements. And what Field Act is the higher structural requirements and safety requirements associated with school of that era. So of the 1950s era building, the Deer Park School would be much safer than any building built at about that time. The way the law works is under Government Code Section 830.6, design immunity continues, meaning the building is presumed to be safe until there's some reason to believe that there is an unsafe condition. So at the last board meeting, I identified a number of items that required a little bit more investigation, but those items did cause me to question the safety of the building. And those items are that there is no safe fire evacuation route. CAL FIRE has identified this area as an area with fire risk. I believe that they updated all the areas as a result of fires that have been occurring in the area in the past decade or so. There is a water pressure problem with fire hydrants in the area around the school. The fire department, in our meeting with the senior fire inspector at Ross Valley Fire Department, indicated that we needed a minimum of 101 PSI. And there is no fire hydrant nearby that meets that requirement. There is also a requirement that the roads be accessible by fire truck, as well as a 20-foot by 150-foot lane be placed next to each of the buildings. So there are some serious items that were brought up by the senior fire inspector when we talked to him about this building, on top of the other issues that were triggered by the grant extension itself. Those requirements being ADA requirements for access to the building, which are required to be incorporated into your lease. And what I had expressed to Heidi and the board member when we met last week was, after further review, I came to the conclusion that there's a safety condition that has arisen that the board likely was not completely aware of. And I had indicated to Ms. Tomsky that I was going to meet with the boards today, which I did just a little while ago. And I informed the board of the design immunity problems under Government Code Section 830.6. That's the fire-related problems, the fire hydrant problems, the problems with the improvement for access of the single entry, which causes us to believe that this building is potentially unsafe. I also identified to the board, to Ms. Tomsky, and indicated that I was going to let the board know that there is a potential for a personal board member liability problem, which is a little bit beyond the scope of the open session, but I did let her know, and I did let the board know of the personal board member liability aspects associated with continued use of an unsafe building. So I do believe that after looking at the land use issues, while the building met Field Act requirements up to the point where the investigation occurred, what I've now found causes me to believe that the building has safety problems that either requires a significant amount of money to be invested in the building to bring fire hydrants, to bring access roads, to bring a secondary access road, and to significantly upgrade the building for fire and for access, or this building would not be a good candidate for continued use. Kind of similar to that Paso Robles case where a building eventually became out of compliance, resulted in a death after an earthquake occurred, and the building crumbled on occupants. The owner had no idea that there was a safety problem. They were presumed to have known. Here, I'm informing the board of a safety problem that we've identified after we were asked to do the lease extension. So with that, does the board have any questions?
Yeah, Terry, it's Wesley speaking. Now that we're on notice of a potentially unsafe condition, how long should the tenant remain on the property?
The government code section on liability provides a reasonable amount of time to undertake an investigation and to alleviate and put funds towards the investigation. Given the fact that this is not a school that you are using, it kind of is senseless to pour a whole bunch of money into a building that you're not using, especially given the amount of renovations that are required. So a reasonable period of time could be 30 to 60 days. I would be reluctant to suggest it's going to be much longer than that unless you're going to seek funding to do a significant repair on the building.
That seems like a rather short period of time, given it's a operating school with kids and all of that. I mean, is that time frame specified, or is it just stated reasonable? Like, do we have some?
The school is starting in 2 months.
Right.
So
I mean, it would be hard for them to find a place, and not really fair to give them that short of a time frame before school starts, and not that long. What's the?
The problem is you don't actually know when you're going to have a calamity, and since we don't know when there could be a calamity, you're reliant on what a court looking backwards 2020 will say was a reasonable amount of time. I know I can get you probably 30 days. I believe I can get you 60 days. If let's just say for the sake of argument, we said a year. If nothing happens in the year, then you're fine. But if something happened during that year period of time, there are going to be questions as to what is a reasonable amount of time under the statute. And that's undefined. And since it's undefined, it becomes somewhat discretionary. So I would be reluctant to say a year, but I do have that understanding that it would be very difficult for the child care facility to move very quickly. So I do understand that, and I am sympathetic. And, I can look more, but I would say if you ask a lawyer, I would tell you 30 to 60 days.
Well, Terry, this is Ryan. that's not gonna happen. I just don't in good conscience understand how, well, I guess it's two-part. First of all, knowing what we know, knowing what we've discovered, what you're telling me as one trustee, I don't speak for everybody, what kind of liability are we under if we hear from our attorney that says one thing and then we're trying to, be community-minded trustees with a fiduciary to our constituents, our district, and our population? I mean, what is the risk? I mean, obviously we say, yeah, if nothing happens, great. But now that we've come to learn these things, how do you toggle between what you're telling us and what I think is a fair amount of time to be conscious of the difficulty that we're asking for? And the second part of my question, if I can put it to you at the same time, is I'm hearing what you're saying loud and clear, but I'd like to know what an opposing counsel might say to what you're saying so that I can hear the opposite side of the arguments that you're presenting.
Well, let me answer. It's a two-part question, so let me answer it this way. I'm going to take a somewhat conservative position because I don't want to see the board ever be placed in a position where you potentially have something that might be a personal liability problem. But I do recognize that building's been there for 70 years. And since it's been, and I see it. I mean, I see the pictures. It looks really wonderful there underneath all the trees. But that's exactly what it is that is causing the problem. So I realize that for 70 years you haven't had a fire. We could say you've been lucky for at least the last 20, but at some point the time does run out. You never know when. So if I was a lawyer on the other side, there are a couple of things that I would say. I would say, oh, come on, it's not really personal board member liability. There is actually qualified immunity, is the first thing I would say. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would say is, isn't it true that you could actually, the building's not actually unsafe, it's because it's an older building, and in order to make it completely safe, you would have to do, you could actually clear out some areas, you could put the fire hydrant in, you could upgrade the building. That's all true. The problem with the argument is you're going to have to put millions of dollars into a building that you're not going to use as a school. You would have to build it to Field Act requirement, and you would have to bring a secondary access and expand the road that goes across a water district property, which is not yours, that instead belongs to the Marin Municipal Water District. So it would be a pretty difficult task and a very expensive task, and certainly would drive up the rent beyond what it is that the child care center is currently paying, because you would pass on, of course, some of that increase in cost to the child care center, which would make the rent for the building prohibitive. On the earlier part of the question with regards to qualified immunity, yes, I do recognize that the law says that there may be personal board member liability, but why go through it? Why go through the situation where if, let's say, some of the kids in the building get hurt, or something happens which results in kids getting hurt? Why go through the heartache of, number one, having kids get hurt, number two, then having lawsuits against the individual board members that would then be picked up by the JPA through the school district. And there is a point in time where the liability exceeds the ability of the school district and the insurance, basically the JPA, to pay. And then you would continue to have board member liability. We've never seen it in California, but it with something that is of significant calamity, you could see something like that happening.
Thank you.
This is Shelley. So you gave us a good list of the fire issues and unsafe conditions. Are there in having to do this work and or any of the other facility and capital upgrades, are there other considerations? You mentioned something about having to bring it up to Field Act requirements, or there additional like grant requirements from a grant. Were there other stuff besides the fire stuff that you were, I mean, it sounds like there's more than just that too.
There's quite a few. So in a fire zone, typically there are some fire sprinkler requirements. The code does change. So just like the science associated with an automobile that now has airbags, whereas probably when we were kids, there weren't airbags, and seatbelts. Some of us may remember back when there weren't seatbelts. With schools, it's the same thing. You're guaranteed you're going to have to upgrade your fire alarms. You're going to have to redo all your ADA access. You will have to take access all the way up to the entrance of the building where the parking lots are and bring all the parking lots up. You would likely have to redo the structure itself to accommodate air conditioning units if you're going to put them on the roof. And then you have energy requirements that apply to buildings that didn't apply in the 1950s. About 1984 or so, energy requirements started to apply to buildings.
Terry, can I?
Those are just the things beyond the fire that I can think of.
This is Ryan. Quick question on top of that, just to add on. Is that for this particular tenant because they have children there, or is it any tenant, or is it those school requirements that you're talking about? If, for example, is that just the site in general for anybody, or is what you're describing only for a site with children?
That is the site in general for, this is a Field Act building, so you would improve the Field Act requirements.
Okay,
So just basic minimum requirements. For sure you would have to do fire alarm, for sure you're gonna have to do ADA.
Got it, thank you.
Plus, I'm sure it's even more in the children's center and all
And
that.
it's a conditional use permit.
Got it.
You had mentioned, just in terms of making sure that, you know, the Children's Center is aware of all of this, you had mentioned a meeting on May 23rd with the Children's Center, and you had mentioned, you know, talking to them about liabilities or anything else, I mean, just to make sure that they are, you know, kept definitely in the loop as we go on this. Is there anything else about that meeting that we need to know about?
I realize that they've been there for a really long time. And I do also realize that in a lot of ways, a structure like this in the woods essentially is kind of a nice place for a kid to go to school or go to a child care center at. But, and that's what I expressed to them. I do see the beauty associated with it, but I also recognize there's a severe safety problem. So I told them about a structure, a camp that was very similar to this type of situation called Camp High Hill, which was owned by Long Beach Unified School District down in Southern California. And Long Beach Unified ended up abandoning Camp High Hill because of these exact same fire issues. When we commissioned the fire report, to our surprise, what we saw was if there was a fire in the area, the flames would move at about 80 miles an hour. So I did let the Ms. Tomsky know about our, by analogy, a very similar camp over with Long Beach Unified for Camp High Hill, just to kind of give her an idea that we have run into this situation before.
Wow. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, with respect to the timeline in terms of, you know,
What's
trying
next?
to work, continue to work and meet again with the child care center and talk to them about how to make this work. Are there any other actions in process or that you would need to be taking? I noticed there was something about time for investigation. Are there things that we need to be doing that show that we are continuing to make forward momentum on this in terms of being reasonable in the amount of time? Is there stuff pending that you're working on?
I see the logic and the thought that I realize that you've had this tenant for a really long time, and it's really hard to move on a dime.
Yeah.
The reality is you're on a month-to-month lease right now. And as being on a month-to-month lease, we could ask them to leave in 30 days. I know that that's not fair, that's not right. No one would agree to something like that. What I do think would make sense is perhaps for staff, Marcy and Chris and myself to sit down with the child care center and work out the terms on how long. How long would it take for them to reasonably find another location and move, rather than unnecessarily be placed in a position where not only are we worried about the safety, they're placed in a safety compromised situation. So it's best for all of us to alleviate that problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. I was thinking about asking what's next, but that's explained that. Yeah.
Well, I'd just like everybody, this is Ryan, to remember that when negotiating this and talking about this, that I think that we all agree that this is a vital part of this community, regardless of if they're a tenant of ours or not. And I know that that's got to be really difficult to try to work with one hand fire safety issues from what you're reporting, and the good that this group of people has provided this larger community for many, many years. So I just want to put that out there, that that's not an easy thing to deal with. But as we do this, I personally, and I know you all feel this way, that they provide a vital service to this community, much bigger than just our school district. So, but I'm not professional enough to understand how you deal with safety versus community.
Well, thank you. I think that once we meet with the child care center and address timing, what would work for them, I can report back to the board, and I'll work out some documentation with regards to how the termination of the current tenancy will work, and I'll report back at an upcoming board meeting.
There's last question just came to mind. There's nothing like a hold harmless kind of agreement that you can. Well, that wouldn't work either. Now that you know what you know.
I would not advise that.
Yeah,
I would not advise it. It is possible. I'll give you an example. Okay, this is a real true to life example. And yours truly, when I was younger and stupider, I thought about something like this. So there was a house that was about 5,000 square feet that was perched on a cliff, and it was actually sliding down the hill. But it had not been red tagged yet, but it was really close. You could take a marble and drop it on one end, and it would run all the way to the other end. $50,000. I thought about buying that house for $50,000, kind of looking at it like a car. At some point I would be told I would have to move. And then my brother, who's a structural engineer, pointed out to me, hey, it could move while you're in the building. So one day you would wake up and you'd just be dead. So $50,000 would not be such a good idea.
Yeah.
So I tell you that story because sometimes the whole harmless is not worth it.
Yeah, no, I kind of thought that idea through really quickly and realized that was, I don't want that on my conscience, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, because it's not like the risk is going away.
Once you know what you know, you can't unknow it.
Unknow it.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Before we go any further, I want to see if we have any public comment on this item. Okay, so we don't have any other public comment on this item, just want to make sure. Rachel?
So Terry, basically, I just kind of want to sum up. You're telling us that as our district attorney, that there are obviously a list of unsafe conditions that you guys have discovered since you started looking at renewing this lease. And right now you're telling me that there's a risk to kids in this building? Is that what I'm hearing? And that
is exactly what I'm telling you.
Okay, and if we wanted to mitigate that risk, we'd have to put in millions of the district money into this building that we own but we don't use.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's still, the overwhelming thing is that there's kids in these buildings that aren't safe. I mean, that's what I'm hearing that's what's the most important thing to me. Like, I don't want children in an unsafe environment. I mean, that's key to me.
Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure that's
Thank you.
got it boiled down. Okay.
So,
That's a good summary, really.
Yes.
Because the longer they stay,
Yeah.
exactly.
I don't want that.
They come back in August, and that's dangerous.
I don't want anyone to be unsafe.
but it sounds like then, Ryan, as you were saying, there's this tension between just the reality of wanting to continue to have them as a community resource,
Yes,
to work with them
correct.
to find a solution to both make a safe space for kids
Yeah.
and to try and find a solution by working with them, and that the next step would be for Terry, you, and the staff to find another time to meet with them to start talking about next steps and solutions and timeframes and those kinds of things. Does that sound,
That's
Marcia,
what I
like
heard,
you?
yeah.
That sounds reasonable.
And our next board meeting
June 14th.
is June 14th, and then we've got a bit of a break, so it sounds like that would be, to keep this moving along, yes, would be
That would, we wouldn't want to shoot for having a conversation between now and then.
between now and then, so
Yeah.
that we could hear the report back
Report back.
on that date. All right, Terry, does that make sense?
All right.
Is there any other next steps?
Works for me.
Any other next steps?
I will plan on meeting with the child care center, and we'll talk about timing, and I'll plan on reporting back on June 14th.
Thank you.
Sounds like a
Great.
plan.
And then Chris and I will be in touch with you tomorrow to look at what your calendar and ours is, and we'll see what we can get going. Then we'll reach out to Heidi. And then I heard the trustee who came from their organization, I remember right, is Peter Chambers.
Okay, so you can meet with
They're
them.
board members.
Yeah,
They're
they're
board
board
members. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Terry.
Very
Thank you,
informative.
Thank you, Terry.
Wow.
Okay.
That's a lot of notes.
That's sad.
Okay.
Now we're up to.
So now we're up to
The window.
one, which becomes two. So the window onto Ross Valley School District with a focus on wellness.
I'm sorry, and sorry, I'm just a little stuck on that last time.
Yeah, sorry, give us a pause to
Yeah,
take a breath.
okay. So this evening, Eric Sable will be giving an update on student wellness, engagement, and connectedness. And if you'll all remember, this was an important item that we put into place with our extended learning opportunities plan. But even outside of any COVID relief or any kind of mitigation we have in place due to the pandemic, student wellness, engagement, and connectedness is always a priority of the district. So with that, Eric, and I think you're going this alone tonight, is that right, Autumn?
So many angels on just surrounding and on the shoulder. Julia has also been a great partner in just putting this together. But in terms of presenting tonight, my partner Autumn Marbury has something else come up. Our social worker and TSS wellness coordinator at White Hill. So unfortunately she can't be here. So I'm going to do my best to really represent not just the work that she does, but of course us as a collective district. So I just want to really start with something that I think we all know, which is, and I'm not sure how to advance the slides.
Do you want
Clicker
someone
right
to
here.
do it for
No, that's
you,
okay.
Eric? Okay, great.
Is it?
Turn it on.
Turn it on the side, there's a button.
On the
There
side.
we go. I've done things like this before, actually. There we
There we
go.
go.
So I think that our focus, of course, is what we were just talking about. It's always safety and well-being of all students and staff, and by extension, our community. And this idea of Maslow before Bloom, meaning that if you look at the roots of the trees, and it's all those aspects of taking care of the person before that individual can go up Bloom's taxonomy and learn at high levels. And so really, I think this is what the role of the public institution has always been, but now we really explicitly understand that after what we've been through the last 2+ years with the pandemic, and also horribly, tragically, what happened in Texas last week, and so many other dozens of times that we would almost lose count. So Maslow before Bloom, we're working as a collective to take care of the person, and then from there, the learning can happen. I just want to acknowledge, as we already did at the beginning, thank you, Shelley, just a couple images. You know, I shared the one on the left with the special ed team earlier this year, and this to me is what we've been doing and where we've been the last 2+ years. And we've been running dangerously large waves. And we put our own health on the line as educators. Our families have been having to support their children at home and in the transition back. And it can maybe be hard to lose track of just how long we've been engaged in that. Over 2 years. 2 years, 3 school years. I look at pictures of my own children when the pandemic started. They're 11 and 15 now. They look like babies. It's crazy. So, and the image to the right to me, I mean, this feels like where all of us are at least everybody I know, certainly myself. We, as a district, as a community, education, writ large, we continue to make lemonade out of lemons, and the lemons just keep coming. So all I want to do is acknowledge that this presentation is not so much about the district program. It's about the collective effort and commitment that we all have to support each other to do what we're here to do, which is to help our children thrive. Look how beautiful they were up in the front row, coming to share what it is that we all work every day at night, oftentimes, to provide. And this isn't any one person or one aspect of our operation that's feeling this, it's everybody feeling this. And we should feel privileged at all that we've been able to do and accomplish, I think, in comparison to a lot of other places. So I just wanted to start with that little acknowledgement. And if you're listening out there, I'm thanking you too. Just real quickly, our Surgeon General, General Dr. Murphy, has declared that we're in the midst of a mental health crisis, which makes this work even more urgent. And when you look at the complex tapestry of it all, it makes all the things that we're doing and continuing to do, I think, all the more important and also impressive at all the vision that's come together, that's anchored in that first thought, wellness first. Our LCAP goal, number 2, I think should be familiar, and just for the sake of efficiency, so that we are able to get to our other important topics tonight. I won't read every word verbatim, but we want to enhance that student sense of belonging so that they feel respected and celebrated for their individual differences. I'm gonna just kind of give a little sampling. Like for me to like go, like from A to Z, I mean, it would be hours. And none of us have the time for that because, we have to get up tomorrow and be ready to do our job. Just a couple images from around the district of what it looks like. Our big question in all of our equity work is, what does it look like for students in the classroom? They showed us just right now. They came and they narrated that to us. So what does wellness look like? We can talk about it day and night. We can yammer on about whatever our vision statement is. What does it actually look like? And what are their perspectives? What words do they put to it? That's what counts. That's ultimately what counts. This is our middle school counseling center, such an incredibly welcoming space. And our counselor, Michelle Pelton, our school social worker, Autumn Arbery, not only see individual students, but their space is really a campus hub. Kids are in there at lunchtime. They're coming in just to hang out, to kind of get away from it all. It really is a wonderful, amazing space to just go and you just feel it. Okay, it's really special.
Eric, is it like one big room and 3 little rooms, or what's the configuration?
The center room there.
Okay.
I know this has a laser pointer, but I don't want to.
No, but just like to get a sense of.
They have their 2 offices.
Okay.
And it feeds out onto the 6th grade courtyard. And the thing that's so evident is the children feel so comfortable going there. They also serve students in special education. They provide DIS counseling. Those are services written into IEPs. So they're also a part of our special education team.
Okay.
In fact, we just hosted our special ed meeting there a 3 weeks ago, right in the counseling center. But we also know that things like play and playing is so critical for people of all ages. On the left, that's actually an image of an adult. Oops, sorry, I have to advance this. That's an image of the adult recess that they put together for the White Hill staff, which was a couple weeks ago. Super powerful. Of course, we continue to be a part of Global School Play Day, which started right here in Marin County back in 2015. Those are just examples of things that aren't just good for kids, they're good for our adults too. Because guess what? Staff also need wellness. I want to just talk super quick about even the professional development endeavors that we have from in-house. Our special education staff has delivered multiple sessions across staff meetings talking about different sensory strategies to use in the classroom that help kids. And this is actually brain research. On the left, brain after sitting quietly, okay, kind of dormant, and then over on the right, red's good in that case. 20 minutes of walking and activity, it's all fired up, it's ready to learn. So this is what our specialists, our staff is out talking about with our teaching faculty. So we're really talking about, again, this integrated understanding of what it means to get to high level learning. This is Maslow before Bloom right here. This is like a scientific illustration of it. It's pretty good. Yeah. Just a couple slides here. This is a lot of information that our community can see on the agenda. But the MTSS Wellness Coordinator is a .2 position that Ms. Arbery fulfills. And it is a district-wide role. Of course, she's housed at White Hill, but she consults across the district, including with things like the suicide prevention training, another consultation. And that, of course, is going to continue into next year. They're over on the right there are the WOWs that they put together on a frequent basis, where the White Hill staff gives each other recognitions and appreciations. And then more information about her work, including lots of communication with a countywide network hosted by the Marin County Office of Education Wellness Collaborative. Tons of different agencies that she collaborates with, looking at bringing on board different programs to support student wellness. And
Eric?
yes, please. Oh, sorry.
Just really quickly before you go, for anybody else who's listening, MTSS is multi-tiered systems of supports. I know we use a lot of acronyms amongst ourselves, but every once in a while, I just wanted to for anybody who's listening, the multi-tiered systems of support, so that meeting students where they're at in terms of what kind of supports they need. So carry on. That was just a PSA announcement for whoever's listening.
That was well done. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So Marin County Office of Education has also identified 3 school districts across the county to implement a wellness screener pilot called CalHope next year, Ross Valley being one of them. So we're extremely excited about that, and that's something that there'll be more information to come in the fall. But essentially, this is exactly a part of that MTSS process to establish more universal screeners. So rather than our work being responding to crisis, what we do is we have tools in place where we're giving these screeners to our students so that we're able to do more early recognition and intervention, and also understand and see where there's strength, where there's good positive feedback. Okay, so just a quick summary of just some of the community partners that we've worked with. And I also want to give a shout out to the Bay Area Community Resources Organization. We've contracted with them to provide counseling support this year in the form of a 1.6 elementary
Should it be
school
next?
counselor.
Should it be next slide, Eric?
Oh, sorry, next slide, my bad.
I'm
clicking it on 2
See,
different ones.
I'm paying attention.
No, thank you. keeping me grounded here. So I want to recognize our 2 Bay Area Community Resource counselors, Jessica Chesbrough and Grace Canton, for their great work at our elementary schools. And we are excited to announce that we've hired a 1.0 counselor in-house at the elementary level for next year, which is amazing. And we're continuing to search high and low for another. So I want to just move a little bit into some different data. We could really go over a really deep dive. Like we could go to the center of the earth, but we're not going to go that far. But I want to start with a few things that let us know we have a lot of kids that are struggling, that are that we need to get back and we need to re-engage. One bit of data here: the pre-pandemic chronic absenteeism data. Chronic absentee means 10% of school days missed. So 18 school days. Think about that. That's almost 1 month of school, right? Right, 5 days times 4. So 7.7%, which is, not a great number. That was pre-pandemic, and it's basically double this year. 245 kids. That's a really, really worrisome number.
Those are unexcused?
They might be excused. That's not a question of, sorry, that's a very good question. It's not it could be illness, there could be things that compound it. It isn't just kids that are like, hey, I'm not going to school.
Okay.
But the point is that
Not going to school.
there's always going to be kids that are sick, like they get a cold or COVID in this case. But I think that what we're seeing with this 21-22 is this is beyond just COVID days. We are working with a lot of kids that are really struggling to get back to campus in a consistent kind of way. So that's just one piece that we're working on as a district. I want to move to just start talking about our climate and wellness survey that we did across grades 2 through 8. Working with Panorama and Education, and here's a quick slide that just shows all the many school districts with millions of students across the country. They have a very large data set with which we can compare ourselves and sort of see where we're at relative to the rest of the country. This is really impressive and a ton of collaboration. The White Health team did a great job. The elementary principals and their teachers did an amazing job. We had a huge turnout of students 3 through 5 and then the middle schoolers. So that's a significant portion of our district population. Is really great. And looking at data, it can be real easy to kind of cherry pick something that just looks bad or negative or terrible, or something that looks like, oh, that means that we're great. And I think that what we have an opportunity to do with the troves of information that have come from this survey, not just this one, but also the staff surveys we're giving and the parent surveys that the middle school has already sent out, that the elementary schools are sending out this week, is to really sit with it and break it down. It's been a long road the last couple of years, and this is, I would say, our first big holistic effort to really gauge student, staff, and parents across a lot of different criteria. So we need to sit with it. So at first, what is it telling us? What does it not tell us? Absolutely, let's talk about our strong points. And then also, what are the implications for our work? Where are we prompted and guided and urged to go and focus our efforts? So real quickly, we'll look through the elementary results. One category was sense of belonging. 69% of students say they feel like they are valued members of the community. Remember, this is elementary 3 through 5. We broke it down, we separated those. And then we also, one reason why we really like Panorama is we're able to disaggregate the data in any number of ways. Our focus is on racial equity this year and moving forward. And so we wanted to make sure to share how that breaks down around race and ethnicity for each of these. And I urge the community to definitely take a look at this presentation and really check it out. I'm not going to do it service right now. One of the specific questions in this category, how much support do the adults at your school give you? 73%, which is a robust, good, healthy number. Teacher-student relationships is another big category, how strong the social connection is between teachers and students. We know that great learning and a healthy campus climate starts with those positive relationships. They report it at 68%. And then school safety, of course, is another extremely key factor. The perceptions of physical and psychological safety at school. And this score is actually, it was one that was, we were able to gauge on a national level, and it's in the 90th percentile, so that's something to feel good about. Obviously, always room for improvement. And then some elementary comments. I want to say that the act of giving a survey, we don't do it just to have a hobby. There's a real purpose behind it. We want to get at their answers. And just the fact that they're being asked about their experience is really valuable in and of itself. Mm-hmm. We're asking our kids as young as 3rd grade, tell us about your experience. How are you doing? Give us your honest feedback and your honest perspective. And I just want to point out, Julie and I were laughing about this earlier in the middle. Does it hurt the teachers how I answer these questions? I would never want to hurt them. I just want to explain. This child is kind of worried that they're going to offend somebody. And so these are really heartfelt answers. Now, obviously, in any survey, there's going to be a couple, 3-4% of answers that are just kind of whatever. You toss them out. But because they're too personal or they're just kind of obviously mean. But what we can get to in looking at the bulk of them is a great overview. And I encourage people to read those. Moving on to the middle school. Supportive relationships with family, friends, and adults at school. 80%, which I think we feel is a very strong number. It ranks 50th percentile nationally. Again, always room to grow, but that's great feedback for the White Hill community looking at sort of that fabric of support around kids. So this supportive relationships category, this percent of students, 62% state they have a teacher or their adult at school who would support them no matter what. And again, as with all questions, we break it down by race and ethnicity. In terms of the responses, 44% of students feel they are valued members of the school community. this is in the category of sense of belonging. Now, I will say that as a 6-year middle school principal, middle school is a time where students are starting to push back a little bit against the institution. Their friendship circles are starting to change. Their relationship with adults is starting to, shift. There's a little bit of a rebellion. I used to call our 7th graders the grizzly bears. You know what I mean? They come as teddy bears, and 7th grade, the grizzly comes out. So in part, like a result like this feels kind of natural to me in that they really are questioning, like, who am I and how do I fit into this setting? It's not that we don't want to see more kids reporting positively, but it's also important to know where they're at on their journey in terms of middle school. Again, that sense of belonging, 57% overall feel like they belong at their school. And again, questions like these give the staff an opportunity to really dig deeper and look at what does it mean to cultivate that sense of belonging. Diversity and inclusion was a whole section of the student survey. And I mean, there was a whole series of questions around, the climate around diversity and inclusion and equity. How diverse, integrated, and fair school is for students from different races, ethnicities, and cultures. 71% reported positively. Overall, though you can see that there's differences in how different racial and ethnic groups responded. How fairly do adults treat people of different races, ethnicities, or cultures? That's a 91% positive response. Again, there's some variation in terms of how different groups responded to that. Some middle school comments. Again, this is a smattering. There were hundreds. Just please understand, there's a lot there, and the staff has not even had the opportunity to read through every last one. It's a big, big survey. This is interesting, the middle one. Teachers and other adults can ask more questions about our personal lives to just really connect with us. I think that would help everyone feel more connected, not just me. I mean, our students are providing like very specific feedback, actionable, tangible. That's why we ask. Our next steps, just quickly, obviously as a district, we're continuously working to articulate and make cohesive all of our efforts, but specifically around our social emotional learning practices. Sites are going to be debriefing this survey data and establishing key action steps. We're going to continue to develop the multi-tiered system of supports as an entire entity, as a series of practices and approaches. We're implementing wellness screeners. We also, rather than just doing the one survey at the end of the year, want to do more kind of temperature checks along the way. They might be shorter, but getting that quick feedback, even a 10-question survey in the early fall, gives that opportunity for some formative work for the staff to do. And also collaborate with local districts. They're going through the same stuff we are. They have the same challenges. They're seeing some of the same opportunities. We have to partner with them. So we're excited to continue supporting that. Okay, I'm not sure how much over time I am. I won't ask Teresa because she'd say so.
Not too much. We had 20 minutes on this, so we're doing good.
I just wanted to open it up if there are any comments or additional questions before I conclude.
Should I be surprised that my middle schooler didn't ask me that he's being surveyed?
Yeah.
I had no idea this was even going on.
No, you shouldn't be surprised. And I think there were, I believe there were communications that went out, but of course that also could potentially have,
And maybe he wanted to maintain his privacy. Maybe he didn't want me to know.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Did you take the parent survey?
I'd have to check with the boss on that.
I certainly I've missed the parent survey. I've never.
The actual questions, Eric, what do they look like?
The questions, do you mean like what does it look like for
the kids who are filling in the survey?
Totally. I mean, it's just a bank of questions that a lot of them are multiple choice, and they have a kind of a wide range of responses. And how Panorama does it is it'll ask like a bank of 8 to 10 questions, and then that is grouped into, for example, sense of belonging.
Got it.
All those things together. All those 10 questions dump into that sense of belonging. So you could, in those individual questions, you'll have all your percentages. But for example, here's a question from this is the elementary parent survey. I don't want to give it away, but I will. That we're going to ask, how much of a sense of belonging does your child feel at their school? Okay, so now we're going to ask the parent, what do you think? And the answers range from no belonging at all the way up to tremendous belonging. There's 5 choices there. So it's asking for a lot of nuance in that multiple choice. It's definitely not just yes or no. And then there's 3 response questions.
But so some of those answers aren't asked of the kids, they're asked to the parents.
Oh, well, sorry. So the kids have theirs. And then White Hill has sent out its parent survey, and the elementary schools are going to be sending that out this week.
So there is a version of that question for the kids.
Yeah.
Got it.
Thank you.
Anyone? I've got a couple of questions. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you for getting this information out so quickly, because I know my son actually communicated that he'd done it, so I knew it was around. But
Lucky you, Rachel.
I heard about it. So he hey, we get extra free time to do this cool survey. So he had no problem doing the survey. I think it was kind of a novelty, but I think it's great because it looks like you got pretty good engagement from the students. And at middle school, I believe Matt said sometimes middle school students can be apathetic.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that you got such response, and I would like to see some action done on some of those things where the numbers were lower. But it's great because it looks like the kids were really specific about how to make improvements too. So part of that engagement, and I think having all this information coming back at us so quickly is going to really help, because they took the time to give us this fantastic information, and we have all this data now. And the fact that we're looking at it and we're going to do something on it soon, hopefully, I think it's really helpful to continue having that engagement going forward. So thank you.
Well, for sure. And I think this is understood, but the process of getting 50 teachers together and a school administration and a wellness staff to dig through this and really process that, I mean, that's a big endeavor. And I don't pretend to represent the diversity of that conversation. And what I have pulled out of this survey was just my effort to show some of the bigger picture responses to kind of those key indicators we were looking at. So my point is they did a tremendous job, and it's the reason why they also give the survey at school. When you have that captive audience, now getting the parent response, we're going to have to bird dog that a lot. I know from experience that a lot of times if you're struggling to get to 20%, and we're trying to really get more of a critical mass of responses, because that engagement, like you said, that really matters. And also too, it can be scary. It is scary to give surveys because we're worried about the critical feedback that'll come. But the amazing thing about it is so much of that is constructive, and we also get to highlight so many strengths and people really resonating with the great aspects of what's going on. We don't want to lose track of that.
Yeah, I had a follow-up onto the, gathering so much information, and was wondering whether this is in process or going to be done, was either with staff or with parents or in a report or something like that. Really helpful to have the national comparisons, like where does this rank on the percentile thing, and also really appreciate that through Panorama you can disaggregate it by race and ethnicity. And one of the questions that I had in doing that disaggregation by race and ethnicity to think about next steps, and because it's a lot of information and we can't do everything all the time, all at once, at the same time, and to help the district and staff prioritize or group and look at themes and look at, in terms of equity themes, and taking the disaggregated data and doing some data analysis with it to be able to say, we're seeing a consistent theme with students of 2 or more races. We're seeing a consistent theme in a gap between these kinds of ethnicities, and asking those, what is the data telling us in terms, so it's kind of like digging deeper into those themes of what is the data telling us with respect to race and ethnicity and how students answer these questions. I don't know if you're doing that kind of data analysis, because I'm sitting here watching and I'm doing like quick gap analysis calculations on the
to see where is on certain
and,
questions the gap is bigger than other questions. So I think definitely
so I
where
don't
I'm going
know
with that.
that's part of what you're doing.
Well, and I think that process, I mean, so our district, of course, we possess a lot of expertise, but not all. We need to find partners in our different parent groups, collaborate again with other local districts, really talk about. And then it's the way I feel about it is, we show our priorities by what we spend our minutes talking about when we're together as adults. Just like when we are with our kids in class or, out in, doing other stuff in the school context or beyond. What are we dedicating our minutes to? And so, like anything, if we're serious about making this something that turns into tangible, positive evolution of what's going on, we're going to dedicate the time to it at our meetings. We're going to really get serious about how we're going to do that analysis. And what I'd say is part of the process has to bring the students back in the room. We want to know how students of 2 or more races are responding. Let's get a focus group going. Let's bring in so we can talk to them in a more kind of, organic kind of way. Because sometimes, they're going to be able to dive deeper than just on a survey response. And so that's just one example. But
I think this work is crucial coming off COVID. Like I think as a benchmark numbers, when we look at what we're seeing, this couldn't be more important than right now. To have this data, people coming back in, to be able to compare this analysis and compare this with 4 years from now, and really see if we were able to see where the gaps are and how much was it coming. Because look, as a board member before COVID and after COVID, the game is different. It's not a game. The process, everything has changed. There is nothing that we should assume is now. And so having data like this moving to the next phase of what might be normal in the new normal post-COVID, I just think having this data right now is absolutely invaluable, because we'll be able to see where we are and how much of it was coming out of COVID and how much of it still may be present, especially after we're now daylighting it, and actually can try to address what we're seeing and see if as a collective board or a collective district, we're able to find the gaps, apply attention to where we see them, and see if we can make the difference, and then compare these later. I just think it's a really important piece that we have this right now.
And along those lines, I was wondering, how many other districts are using Panorama? Do you know roughly?
I don't, but I'll ask.
And the reason that I was asking that was the idea of capacity to do that data analysis and to run those, charts and things to be able to look at them and see where should the attention be, focused in on. And if there are multiple schools who are all using Panorama, that might be an opportunity to find some capacity.
Hopefully it comes
there or something.
Do they have something out of package?
Analysis, and you can also, when you're looking at your national norms, you can play with it so that it's more with similar districts. Non-urban districts where your low socioeconomic students are at such and such rate, so that it's a more apples to apples.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see this data again. Mm-hmm. It's going to be really interesting.
The baseline is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that just looking at the data right now, the big numbers we see are the numbers of the white students, right? Because 95% of the students are white. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to have a major in math, although, it helps. to see that, we are always exactly 1 or 2 points from the students who are white. This is our school, right? So this is what we see. And I also would like to see a reconciliation with the LCAP, because what I'm seeing here in the LCAP in certain pages doesn't tie with this presentation. So I got kind of a bit of a heart attack earlier when I was looking at 23% of students grade 6-8 responded favorably to having a positive adult relationship on campus. 23% here. I'm not seeing that in the presentation today. So maybe because that's a subset of a higher question there. You know what I'm saying? But I had a big not happy face on my when I look at the LCAP here. So see here.
Understood. You're
I'm reconciling.
You're very perceptive, obviously.
Data analysis
and
over
data
here.
analyst. And yes, there are those bigger, broader categories, and then there's also the individual questions.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting, like, for example, when you look back to, just for example, at the middle school, in terms of the 80% of supportive relationships, right? That's a big, healthy kind of number. But then when it comes to that feeling valued in the school community, it's just a different question.
And maybe it was understood differently, and maybe they felt.
And maybe getting at something kind of different. And so there's a lot of nuance there. Those numbers are all accurate. And that particular one you referenced in the LCAP is an individual question.
Okay, got it. That's an individual question, but today you were presenting those themes.
I'm gonna use your question to maybe segue, because our next item is LCAP. But before I do that, I want to make sure we go out to the audience and see if you have any questions that you want to ask. You're welcome to. No.
I ask a question after the answer.
Yeah, it's an agenda item. So
Yes, so typically when there are public comments, they're not necessarily responded to unless, of course, the trustees also would like to have the answer to the question. But typically it's a public comment, but absolutely can ask a question, and if we don't have the answer right now, staff can get back to you.
Yeah, so I would like to know if this information, so this result of the survey could be available to the parents. Could we have access to them? Could we look at them? Could we analyze them?
So, firstly, thank you for being here tonight. Because otherwise it'd be very lonely in here. I'm just saying. Two is, so this of course is publicly available, right? But of course it's not anywhere near all of it. It's a gigantic vehicle. So what I would say is, look, we have 6 principals and a whole leadership team, and we have our teacher leaders, and so there's a lot of people that need to have the appropriate time to dig in, to look at it. Of course, we looked at it with our parent guardian equity task force group, right, just recently. So that it's out there. We're sharing it. We want to work with all members of the community to look at it. And to Ryan's point, in the mid-fall, we should have a team back here, principals, teachers, students, that are going to come back and talk about what did we learn, what's going on now, what's happening, this, that. And it can't just be the director of student services talking about it, because I'm just, one little point on this constellation. I think that in terms of the raw information, no, I don't anticipate that that's going to go out there. 500 student comments, and I'll tell you from years of doing surveys like this at my former school, there's all kinds of stuff in there that is, it's kind of toxic. It could be somebody taking a shot at a staff member. It could be like talking trash about a community member.
We don't want to see that.
It could be any sorts of stuff. And so the school team absolutely has the responsibility to find what is appropriate, what is pertinent to the purpose of the survey. And then if we are serious about it, now we're going to involve our district team, our community team, to come in and help us be a part of that process.
And I think what we talked about at the Parent Guardian Equity Task Force meeting is the principals will get the data back to their students. And then some of the students, of course, will be gone because they might be 8th graders, or in the elementary's case, it would be 5th graders moving on to middle, but they would do a preliminary response or notification back to the students to let them know that they're taking a look at the data. And then also each of the school sites will be taking a look at their parent meetings. So site council, as an example, will be digging in at that school site. So any information that's provided to the parent groups who would be meeting as part of site council, of course, would be made
It's a good
available.
one for
And
site
those meetings
council.
are public as well. So it'll be some form of report out to families as well. And also with our plan of what are we going to be doing to try to help mitigate and to close some of those gaps, because as we can see, like with those individual, the overall numbers might be kind of high, but when you break them down into subgroups of students, some of those are low. And we need to find out more of what's going on for those students, and to make sure that with those comments, at least the ones that Eric showed tonight, good feedback from the kids, direct actionable responses and feedback. That will be super helpful in going forward. And then looking at from year to year, having the data and seeing, is what we're doing working? Is it working? And how does it need to be tweaked? Is it enough? We might be on the wrong track. So we've got to get more information. And that's why I think those interim types of surveys and or small group feedback sessions will be really important with our kids, as well as with our staff and our parents.
Are you going to do the panorama every year from now on, or are you going to do 1 year that and 1 year the CHIC data, or what's?
Well, the hope is to continue the panorama going forward, especially because we want to, with this year baseline, is to continue on. If we start to use a different survey system, then we won't have necessarily comparable data that we can take a look at from year to year. We did talk about the CHEC, or the California Healthy Kids Survey. And Eric, do you want to take that one?
Oh yeah, well, it's, and that's another valuable tool, and it's also something that we're moving into year 4 of receiving state dollars for tobacco use prevention, which is really exciting. And they like to see districts at least once every 2 years giving a CHIC survey. And it's more targeted, so grades 3, 5, and 7. Typically, we just do 5 and 7. So that's a very targeted group. It's not as comprehensive as this. So I anticipate next year we could probably successfully do the CHIC survey just to get more targeted feedback on drug, alcohol,
drug and alcohol section.
Sort of more of those health factors. Whereas Panorama, while they may have some questions that are like that, they're really much more about climate, wellness, and connectedness, and sort of the student learning experience. And CHICS is not quite as
not as deep in that.
Tool.
Yeah, there's only like a few questions about it, but not as much.
So
I like that.
It's available to all public districts, and so we may as well use it.
9 o'clock. We have to get through the hour.
Well, thank you very much. Sounds like if parents want to learn more, they should talk to the school sites, and we will look forward to hearing more as we hear back on this. But we definitely do want to keep moving on, which to a topic that is actually going to be aligned with this, which is our LCAP conversation.
El Capitan.
Just noticing the time, we've got 2 other big meaty conversations. So moving on to our LCAP presentation.
Right, and Julia Wolfhat, Director of Student Services. Sorry, wrong department. Curriculum and instruction.
There we go. It's all connected.
All connected. Awesome. Yes, and so this is a team endeavor. So Chris, thank you for all of your work on here, and anything that has a $ belongs to him. And Marcy and Eric and I doing
everything else.
Everything else, yeah. And this presentation is going to be quick, and it's the opening act really to the budget conversation as well. And we've talked about what the LCAP is previously, but it's a 3-year plan, and we're in year 2. And it especially talks about how we're going to meet the needs of our kids who need the most attention, which are sometimes we refer to them as unduplicateds, but are socioeconomically disadvantaged kids, our English learners, our foster youth. And then our LCAP, the Ross Valley School District LCAP, has 3 goals. And the first goal is around academics, specifically looking at mathematics and English language arts. And the reason that we selected that goal last year was really thinking about coming out of COVID. And this year, based on looking at multiple years of CASP data as well, and looking forward, we're really interested in heightening our efforts to close that gap and close the predictability that comes with race and academic success. And so that's really important to us. And then goal 2 being our wellness goal that includes our social emotional learning and then also our racial equity work, which is of course a huge focus of our district. And then goal 3 being really about community and community including our students and our families and our staff and getting substantive and timely feedback as evidenced by what Eric just presented about our surveys. And when you write your LCAP, you have these different priorities, some of which are state priorities and some of which are local priorities. And that's a part of our reporting at this time of year. So these are the priorities, the local priorities. And there are different metrics that we use to measure them. And I opted not to provide a tremendous amount on this. We've got kind of a quick view here. But basic conditions is really about, do kids have, safe facilities for them? And we have beautiful facilities here in West Valley, and we have appropriately credentialed teachers, and our students have access to the instructional materials that they need at school. And then priority 2 is about implementing state standards. I can tell you that right now, well, of course, we look at CASP results, we look at some of our local measures, we make sure that our instructional materials and programs are aligned with the Common Core English and Common Core Math standards, with NGSS, our science standards, and with our history social science standards, and then provide, of course, professional development to staff in order to deliver all of that instruction effectively. And then our next priority around parent and family engagement, really, we just had a very wonderful, thorough presentation from Eric on the feedback that we're getting through Panorama Education, through those surveys, surveying staff and parents and students, so all really important. And then we've also really been looking at our participation levels in our different parent groups and trying not only to increase participation, but increase representation so that those members of the community that have had less representation are moving into kind of the central parent roles and able to give us that kind of feedback, which of course also relates, priority 6, to school climate. And again, looking at our survey results and looking at things like absenteeism and school suspension rates and any of those other indicators that give us a sense of how our kids are doing. So this year, in the implementation of our LCAP, some of our successes, we had a new role, and this was paid for largely by our COVID one-time monies, but these MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports partners, which are basically a coaching position. We have 3 coaches this year that were supporting our teachers in TK all the way through 8th grade with tier 1 interventions, which are those classroom interventions that your general education classroom teachers are implementing in order to support kids that need a little lift within the classroom. We've also expanded our tier 2 support. We added FTE to our intervention teachers at all of our sites, and the same can be said for our English language support teachers. So added FTE there as well. This was our first year of having a racial equity action plan, and so the first year of implementation, and there was a lot of success and a lot of learning that came with that. And we also devoted a lot of time this year to working on our, Eric calls it a playbook for our multi-tiered system of supports, both academic and social emotional. And then just challenges, continued COVID mitigation. If it were
even remotely possible to add up the minutes that are spent thinking about and talking about and dealing with COVID. You know, it's a huge layer that's been added to everyone's plates while doing everything else that we need to do. It's been tough. Hiring has been tough, particularly for our classified positions. And because of both of those first two bullets, we've often had to pull support staff like our MTSS partners to fill in for teachers who are out or even principals who are out. And we've also relied on outside agencies when we haven't been able to find the staff that we need. All right, and then in terms of just a broad view of next steps for where we're headed.
Do you have to switch slides?
Oh, it's funny, it's looking at it here and there. Thank you. We are in the process of looking at next year's Racial Equity Action Plan. We had a really great session with our Parent Guardian Equity Task Force last week, where we basically took the plan and put it on big pieces of chart paper and just made sure that everybody in the room touched every paper and was able to give their input and feedback. And where we are now is I've taken those notes and translated them into a document, and then we will have our administrative group take a look at them. We'll be working with Deborah McKnight, our equity consultant, on those, and then also bringing it, of course, to staff to make sure that they have input as well. But we are also in the process at this time of year of talking about professional development and having some conversations in the area of reading, particularly early reading, and looking at phonics instruction and how that fits into our balanced literacy program and our readers workshop and writers workshop. And then also knowing that the math framework is coming forward this July, and so some important steps with mathematics. Also with a recognition that the academic gap between our student groups is wider in mathematics than it is in English language arts, and so that's a particularly important place for our focus. And then along those lines, continuing to work on our multi-tiered system of supports playbook, and some actionable goals, identifying a universal screener for dyslexia for the early grades. We are pretty close to finding an assessment management system, looking at one called Forefront right now. And then also, and actually attached to Forefront, a math screener that can be used to identify students who need more support in mathematics, and also some intervention materials that we're going to be rolling out for mathematics next year. And the rest of it is all in that very long, I think it's a 78-page LCAP document with, you know, one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about it, and of course there's a lot of writing that goes along with it, but it was somewhat gratifying to see that those three goals around the academics and the wellness and the community input feel pretty spot on, that I think we're on the right track, and we obviously, there's a lot of nuance and complexity that we need to add to it. And we're getting smarter as we move along in the process, but I think we're on the right track. And I didn't switch it here, but there you go.
And before we take questions,
yes,
I need to just formally just let everybody know the kind of formalities around the LCAP in terms of us as a board, and then we'll take some questions. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knew, because this is one of those key areas of responsibility for the board of trustees. Around the LCAP and the budget, we've got specific responsibilities. And so one of them is to have 2 public hearings on the LCAP. This is the first of 2, and it's on May 31st on the local control and accountability plan. And just a little bit about the responsibility with respect to Ed Code and the state of California and how the trustees relate to this. That per Education Code section 42127 and 52062, 2 separate governing board public meetings held at least one day apart are now required for the school district budget hearing and budget that's for the budget. Oh, LCAP, sorry. or now, this is the same thing for the budget, so you can hear it again in a couple seconds, or in the next presentation. But the same thing, 2 school district hearings for the budget adoption and for the LCAP public hearing must occur at the same meeting as the budget public hearing, and the LCAP adoption must occur at the same meeting as the budget adoption. The LCAP item must precede the budget item in each meeting. The public hearings require 72-hour public notice, and both the 2022-23 budget and the 22-23 LCAP must be adopted on or before July 1st. So if anybody's wondering about this process and why we're doing it in the sequence, and that we will have another meeting. So for anybody who's listening, there will be another meeting happening on both the LCAP and the budget. At that point, we then do take formal action to.
Tonight's just the public.
So tonight is just the public hearing. The next meeting is the formal action on adopting and approving the LCAP and the budget. So the public hearing had been open when we heard our presentation. And hold on a second. So now I'm gonna close the public hearing. Do we go out for comment first?
Public comment.
So first we're gonna go out for public comment, then I will close the public hearing, and then I'll bring it back to the board for questions. So seeing no public comments in our audience, then I will go ahead and close the public hearing. And now I will bring it back to the board for questions. Gotta make sure we do this right, because this is our one thing we're supposed to do formally, so. Okay, now, questions, thoughts, or considerations?
I just have a comment that, just imagine what we could do without the COVID. I mean, when you said how many minutes we put into all this in just the last years of how much you all have put into changing and just adapting, just the extra minutes, hours, and days combined. Imagine what we could do with that same time if you actually put it into the stuff that we're all talking about. So just imagine how powerful we could be for the betterment of children in our district.
Will be.
We
Yes.
Will be doing it.
Yes. I mean, it's kind of exciting actually I think we're kind
It
of,
is.
I mean, if we could do all of this with
And
that, imagine what we could do.
Mm-hmm.
So just putting that as a comment, not a question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? The other thing I just wanted to note also with our district that I very much appreciate with our LCAP. Even though the LCAP is, as we'll hear in our budget meeting probably, is tied to specific dollars that are targeted to address specific student populations, I appreciate that we take a holistic perspective of our LCAP and apply it to all of the students in our district as well. And noting that with a specific focus on making sure that students who are typically underserved or who need additional supports get those supports, but like the MTSS, as we heard from Eric, is kind of like intervention and prevention ahead of time, and it's just a holistic approach to the LCAP as opposed to just sectioning off in some section, having it sectioned off just for a specific student population. So I just appreciate that. Different districts do it different ways, but I appreciate that our district takes that holistic approach. Any other questions on the LCAP?
Nice presentation.
And I read it. So I went through the 75 pages. I like reading LCAPs in general. And I thought it was well done. So I have to say, it was an interesting read. So I know this is not necessarily for everybody to read, but I thought that was, you presented some of the work that you have been talking about during the year. I pointed out a couple of those metrics that I think need to be maybe more like kind of specified so that we just don't go on a tangent like I did when I saw this 23% and started shouting at myself. So I think this addressed my question, and thank you for doing the work. I know this is a tremendous amount of work to report back on those actions. And I do also, and I said that last time, I do appreciate that the number of actions are not too long, because I think I've seen other LCAP with 30 action per goals, and those are dreadful. And just having heard of them, and I think indeed the work doesn't get done at that level of granularity therefore, I appreciate that you have been able to keep them at a high level enough so then we can read them and we can digest them. Because I have to say, the longer it is, the less you can digest them as a public and as a trustee. So I think this is digestible, and I've read it. So good job on this one. Thank you.
And only one other comment that I'm going to make for anybody who may be listening to this is that what I also have noticed is that we had, for example, the spotlight tonight on health and wellness. We had one on math.
Yeah.
So that you've been providing us a series of deep dive presentations, and they all tie in to the LCAP. So if there's anyone who's interested, so if anyone who's listening is interested in learning more about, what is the district doing about math? Because I noticed there was a comment about the LCAP that had to do with math. If you do a search on the board docs, you can then watch the presentation that will do a deep dive into math. Or in the future, you could do the deep dive into the wellness. And so for additional information, there are places for people to go and see those additional deep dive. And that's been helpful to have all year on those. So I look forward to hearing more of those next year, but it's a nice connection to have this high level and then those deep dives. All right.
Back in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Yes, we will see that for adoption in 2 weeks. So now we have our last presentation action item, which is a companion to the LCAP, shall we say. And I'm just going to read this again because it's one of those things. It's like I said, we have a couple of formal things. So our meeting today, May 31st, we have a public hearing topic, which is the preliminary 2022-23 district budget and multi-year projections for 2023-24 and 24-25. Per education code, same one as last time, 42127 and 52062, in case you missed it the last time. There's 2 separate governing board public meetings held at least 1 day apart, are now required for the school district and budget hearing and budget adoption. So in addition, the LCAP public hearing must occur at the same meeting as the budget public hearing, and the LCAP adoption must occur at the same meeting. Yes, they have to have the same meetings. The LCAP item must precede the budget item at each meeting. The public hearings require 72-hour public notice, and both the 2022-23 budget and the 2022-23 LCAP must be adopted on or before July 1st. I now call the public hearing open.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the budget this evening. It's getting
Tonight. Hang in there,
late tonight.
We can do it.
And so what we'll be discussing this evening is some timelines, the demographics, assumptions, our revenues and expenses, and our projected balances and some major things that are still on the horizon as they were talked about in terms of the May revise and other things, which our May revise meeting with School Services of California was on the 20th of May, which is really, really late when looking at the deadlines that we have for our budget. So some of the things that are built into the May revise may not necessarily get into our budget, and I'll talk about some of those. So Lease, let's see, here we go. So in terms of budget timelines, the first thing we need to think of is what are those timelines for the state? And so by January 10th, the governor provides his January proposal, which is the proposal for the next fiscal year. Then by mid-May, he provides the governor's May revise, which is what we heard from School Services on the 20th that I was just speaking about. And then by the June 30th, the legislature and the governor have to have an approved budget. And so our timelines are all built around those as we move forward. And it looks like there's 5 things on here, but one of them is just repeating. And so we have 4 budgets that we have to produce, and they're done basically every 3 months. And so for June 30th, we have our adopted budget, which is also our estimated actuals. So it's adopted for the coming year. It's our estimated actuals for the current year. And then unaudited actuals by September 15th, first interim, December 15th, and second interim, March 15th. And we do have specific days that we have to report our actual expenses as of for both first interim and second interim, which are shown there. And so as we move into our current year budget, the very first thing that you start with always is what our enrollment will be. And that's important because we're in the people business, we're in the student business, and everything we do is driven off of students. And what you'll note here is both historical information as well as what our estimates are moving forward. And we have historical enrollment that is substantially higher than where we're currently reflected here. We have the large drop that happened between 16-17 and 17-18. And then we also saw then further drops as we got into the COVID shutdown, which was something that was seen throughout the state and throughout the county. So it's not unusual what has happened within the Ross Valley School District. What I do want to point out is one of the things that has happened as you start to move forward is you start to get the expansion of the transitional kindergarten program.
Mm-hmm.
So even though those numbers are relatively flat, it's a little deceptive in that we're gaining additional students because we're teaching basically a new grade, new month's worth of kids. So
otherwise we would keep declining, right?
Otherwise the decline would be greater. So that's something that's important to note. And then keep in mind that all of our revenues are driven off of student attendance as long as we're under state aid. And so when looking at our total revenues, it's important to note as we move into, and we'll get into this a little bit further, as we move from state aid to community funded. Mm-hmm. The reason that is happening primarily is that large drop in enrollment and attendance. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at your LCFF calculations, LCFF is your local control funding formula, which is how we are funded. What's important to note is when you're in decline, you do not get paid based upon your attendance, your lower attendance. You have a 1-year hold harmless, although with COVID we did have a longer hold harmless. So what you'll see is some large discrepancies there, and that's because of those hold harmless figures. So it's always important to see this just kind of as a passing so that we understand that the decline, you will see it in terms of your revenues, it's just always a year in arrears.
So this is helpful because this explains the blue lines show the actual, when the attendance actually dropped.
Correct.
And the red lines show that 1-year delay in when the attendance for funding, that 1-year shift and delay, right?
Correct.
Okay. Great, very helpful slide.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Whoops, oh, that went fast. It's
Because
slow.
it's getting late, so
Yeah.
it's like, okay, let's go on.
It's acting slow sometimes, and in others it just jumps.
The computer
Slides. So the next topic is our assumptions, and this is actually where you start to get into some discrepancies between what's in the May revise and what we have built into our budget.
Yeah.
And one of the largest things that I wanted to point out, and I'll bring back further information, but something like our public employee retirement system, PERS, our numbers are slightly higher than what they have shown for the May revise. And so it's not something that we would make adjustments to our budget right now, but it is something as we move forward into, as the state adopts their final budget, we have to take a look at, are there any material changes? And there are some things that I can guarantee you that are going to be material that's going to happen. So I'm going to have to provide a 45-day budget revision to the governing board after the adoption.
So a 45-day budget revision, which will come between the adoption and the first interim.
It would come before even your unaudited actual in September. So it's 45 days from the adoption date by the
So there'll be an added thing in that timeline. Okay.
Yeah. And so those are some of the things that will be happening. And as looking at this, one of the things that I do want to point out is that you see really large cost of living adjustments, COLAs, those are driving your local control funding formula revenues. And those impact the LCFF calculations for student attendance. But the other thing that is important to note is you also see the property tax increase. And I'm showing that because you're always weighing your property tax increases versus your COLA increases, because they have a direct relationship in terms of whether you potentially shift in or out of your community funded status. And so that's just important to keep those in mind. We do have a really large property tax increase that is projected by the County of Marin at 7.08%. For the county, we're the second highest in the county in terms of school district increases.
Our district.
Ross Valley School District.
That's based on
Real estate.
Those are based upon sales that have happened.
And we're just catching up.
And so looking at our historical data, we've seen some historical numbers that are fairly high as well, which is why our increase that we're showing is 4%, which is moving forward in out years. But other things that I think are important to note are Consumer Price Index, the California Consumer Price Index, CPI. That wouldn't necessarily be as important in the past because oftentimes CBOs, the Chief Business Official, does not necessarily increase the costs of their supplies for the CPI. I've done it this year moving forward just because of the rate of inflation. And so a lot of my numbers are impacted directly by that. Because our inflation is so high, if I don't do that, we may not be able to afford some of the things that are coming down.
So you're saying that the CPI row impacts the expense items on the budget, whereas the other ones are impacting the revenue?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And as you get into the state retirement, state teachers retirement system, STRS, the public employees retirement system, PERS, and the state unemployment insurance, SUI, those impact your benefit costs related specifically to salaries. So you can see that there's some increases coming in the form of STRS and PERS. And we do eventually see a reduction in our SUI. At one point, we had a SUI rate of 0.05%, and in the current year, it raised up to 0.5. So it was a large increase in SUI. And a lot of that was based upon what happened with COVID. So, and the other thing that's important to note, in 21-22, you'll see the 5.07% COLA kind of going back to the top. The only reason it's 5.07% is because they're funding a portion of what was not funded the previous year in the cost of living adjustment, because they held us at 0% last year. Because of the COVID shutdown, there was a large drop in state revenues. And so in order to keep the state from going bankrupt themselves initially, they were talking about a large deficit to the COLA, which would cut our revenues, and they eventually kept it zero funded. But they still owed us those additional COLA dollars. It's in statute that it gets funded to us, and they did that in 21-22. So our actual COLA in 21-22 was 1.7%, and the difference between 5.07 and the 1.7 is what they would have owed us the previous year.
Quick question, the 23-24, go back for a second. In the 23-24 and 24-25 columns,
sorry about that.
The assumptions kind of, they go up in 22-23 and then back down in 23-24, the next 2 years. Is that just because there's just a one-time increase in the COLA and the property tax that we don't expect to continue to be that high? Is that?
So in terms of the cost of living adjustment, it's based upon many different factors. And some of those factors include the consumer price index and other things. So as they look at these, they adjust it every year in every budget period. And so as they go and do the next approval of the budget, some of those numbers in the COLA may actually change as well. But those were the numbers that were provided at the May revise, their best estimates. And one of the things that is also important to note, it's 6.56% in 22-23. It was lower than that at January budget.
This is all such a moving target. Like, how do you possibly put these numbers in, and then like 2 months later, you got to put a bunch of numbers in and come back to the board and be like, okay, here's today's numbers. It's just that's really difficult.
School Services of California has a saying.
Yeah.
There's no. The only thing that's certain is that your budget will change.
So chill.
Well, it's good that
Chill.
I mean, you do a great job of presenting it. It's just hard to stick your teeth in something that just changes so much. And like in 45 days, it's changing again. So anyway, it's very informative.
This is your best work right now.
It is my best estimate with the information provided.
Well, you have to be able to provide us a snapshot of today, even though tomorrow might be,
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So actually getting into the budget for revenues and expenses, this is a good chart to see our revenues, how it's broken down. And you'll notice the large green section of the pie is your local control funding formula. And that is the single largest source of funding that we have. And then looking at it, the red piece of pie is actually our parcel tax, and that's the second largest piece. And that's important to note for our community because that comes directly out of the taxpayers in our community, thanks to them. And that goes directly to help provide services to children. So those are some important numbers. And looking at it, our revenues are just under $28 million. One thing I want to point out, and I know you guys have seen this slide before, there's a reason I'm bringing it back. We are going in, according to our budget right now, we're going into community funded status. And there may be some changes in the horizon in terms of how our LCFF is calculated, and we'll have to take a look at those. Some of the issues, though, that I've noted, we've been provided the district have been provided a calculator with a 3-year averaging based upon the January proposal that the governor had talked about doing. And when I took a look at that, I had to send that back to the County Office of Education. And the County Office of Education then forwarded that off to the state because Ross Valley's was wrong.
Well, thanks to you. They have stopped providing that to every other district in the county, so I'm still waiting for mine. So that was definitely wrong.
Thank you.
Okay. So, thanks to you.
So there's some problems with their calculations.
The calculations.
Really what that shows you is how complex it is.
Yeah.
And so it's a charitable way of putting it. So I did want to point that out. And I know that they've been talking about providing us another estimate, and I haven't received it yet, but part of that has to do with, I'm sure they're trying to double check and make sure that we don't have issues.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job.
Chris, just so I know my vocabulary going forward, we call it community funded and not basic aid.
It's a switch. Yeah.
They're exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
We call it community funded now. It's been a change at the state how they term it.
Okay.
AKA previously known as
Right.
basic aid, now known as community funded.
Did I use the term basic aid?
No.
Okay.
I'm just familiar with it as basic aid.
It's one of those terms that's been ingrained in my head for
You've
decades.
done very good at
The
transitioning.
calculator itself actually crashed basic aid, not community funded. So when you're on the technical piece, you see basic aid, but you need to think community funded.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't put it past myself to make that mistake. That's why I was asking.
No, I just want to make sure I have my vocabulary down right.
When looking at our revenues in a multi-year fashion, what you see here is a progression of our total revenues. And the one thing I really want to stress is 22-23 to 23-24. You see a drop in our local control funding formula. And that has to do with going back to our multiple meetings where we've talked about when we go into community funded status, the second year of entering community funded status, you lose your supplemental tax revenues, as well as you start having to pay out your in lieu property taxes. And so that becomes a reduction to our total LCFF revenues. And that's what you're seeing listed there. And then you see it progress back up, but we're still lower than we would in 22-23. And a lot of that has to do, again, with receiving those dollars continuing.
So the first line there, you're saying the difference from the 18 to the 16 is because the expense is back, both the lost revenue is backed out, but then the expense of having to write a check for the inland property taxes that goes to the charter is backed out of revenue as opposed to showing up as an expense.
Correct.
It's in revenue, right? Yeah.
It gets confusing
Yes.
because it
You could
seems
think
like
about
it's
it
an
as an
expense if you're
expense.
having to
Right.
write a check and pay something,
Good
it's an
point.
expense, but it shows up as being backed out of revenue.
In accounting terms, we would call it a contra revenue.
Okay.
So it goes against it. So it's a reduction of our revenues. And so those are important to note. You also see some changes to our federal revenues, and those are because we're starting to spend out and eliminate out of our budget our federal COVID dollars. And you also see that with our state revenues. Between 21-22 and 22-23, we go from almost $2.9 million down to 2.1. That's the loss of our in-person instruction grant, as well as the
Yellow.
ELOG grant,
The ELOG,
Extended
not
Learning
the ELOP.
Opportunities Grant,
CLOG.
which is, it was part of the opening up school by May of last year.
Are we all backed out of the one-time funds by 23, 24?
We still have a little bit,
Yeah,
but for the
September.
most part, it's
Yeah.
spent out.
Okay. Well, yeah.
And so you see that in the progression.
Yeah.
Moving on to expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're in the people business. And so what you would expect to see is our single largest source of expenses in the form of salaries and benefits, which is primarily, and of that, the largest portion would be your certificated teacher salaries and benefits. And so it's just under 80%. And then our second largest has to do with services and other operating expenses, which is $4.1 million. And we are budgeting to spend just under $27.5 million next year.
When I see the numbers in salary and benefits going down in future years, that's presuming that we have a reduction in FTE.
A lot of that has to do with, for example, we had one-time off-schedule bonuses in the current year through the in-person instruction grant. So that would be an example, and then the other is exactly what you said. So it would be grant-funded positions that are going away.
Got it.
Corresponding to the one-time money being spent out.
Corresponding to those one-time funds.
Are we going to do a new column at some point with contra revenues?
We could do it if that's what you.
I'd like to see the contra revenues.
Absolutely, we can do something like that.
I think that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll make a note and get that on, because I have to provide another presentation. At the next board meeting, I can add that in there,
Thank you.
which would show the dollars that we're spending out for the in lieu property taxes for the charter school.
Thanks.
And the state and this, whatever the.
Maybe supplementary concentration.
The other is supplemental.
Yeah.
Supplementary, you don't get
Supplemental.
concentration.
Lots of
but yeah,
supplemental and the.
for 1 year.
In terms of expenses, and I think this is kind of going back to the point that you were referring to, Wesley, you do see some changes in our budget slightly in salaries and benefits. And you also see supplies dropping in there. And those are oftentimes going to be tied directly to your COVID funds and to the elimination of some of those programs, as we were referring to. And so as you look at it, you do see the progression of our total expenses. For the most part, they're relatively flat between 21-22 and 22-23, slightly lower. But then you do see another drop, and then you start to see them trickle back up. And so those are important things to note, and important things for us to keep at the forefront, because we have timelines specifically when we're looking at positions. In terms of our multi-year projections. This is basically summarizing the
Yeah.
revenues and expenses that we were showing before. But it's also looking at our beginning balances and what our ending balances look like and the gains. And what you will see is our ending fund balance in terms of reserves, the percentage, which is only looking at your unrestricted reserves. They're actually going up between 21-22 and 22-23. But again, that has to do with those one-time funds. But then going back to what we've talked about previously is we do have a structural deficit that you see some red numbers there under net increase decrease in those out years, and that has to do with the loss of those revenues. And so it's not because we're outspending tons of dollars, we're not increasing those budgets. You saw that within the numbers.
We're using it.
But it has to do with the reduction in revenues directly. So those are something that we'll have to be taking a look at and keeping an eye on. And again, going back to what Maureen was talking about earlier, the budget is only as good as the information we have today, and it can change and will change. Especially on the revenue side, it looks like there might be some changes to what that will look like moving forward, and it could have some impact on our status as it relates directly to being in community funded or state aid funded.
Does this budget assume that starting in 22-23 and out those other 2 years, we stay community funded, or does it assume a flip flop? Its assumption of staying?
It assumes, based upon the LCFF calculations at this particular juncture, based upon current law in the state, that we would stay in community funded status.
And the calculator that you had to send back to the state, that has the one with the rolling
The book,
3-year average, right? Okay, so
Yes.
we don't know what that difference might be yet,
But
clearly.
Well, so here's part of the issue. In January, they were talking about making it your 3 previous years, averaging those together and getting your revenues. At May Revise, they were talking about that not being enough. And so they're talking about taking a look at your current year average daily attendance. And because everybody's average daily attendance rate, which is what percentage of children are actually present versus your percentage of absenteeism, they've seen that percent drop. And as a result, what they want to do is take a look at that just for the current year and bump those numbers up to using your previous attendance rate just for 1 year. And so that would then be calculated into that 3-year average. And so for us, it's about 1% roughly. And so it does mean something. It's not a massive amount. There are other districts that have much larger changes in attendance rates because it's based upon children showing up. And with COVID, you're told if you have even the sniffles, you should stay home.
Right.
Out of an abundance of caution and making sure that you don't spread that. So it makes sense that children are getting sick and staying home.
And being precautious, but that lowers your ADA, which lowers your revenue. You have more expense and staff time to be tracking and helping and all that. So say no more.
Say no more.
Inverse relationship between revenue and costs. Time spent.
Do any of your colleagues in the CBO world think that there's going to be anything unusual going on because this is an election year? That there may be some changes?
Actually, you have a good point, and I'm going to move on to the next slide because I think I'm going to answer your question slightly.
Yeah.
All right. So what you'll see here is in the first section, I talk about how is the declining enrollment being calculated, and I mentioned just the 3-year average, and then I talk about the hold harmless for attendance rate decline for COVID, because I wanted to make sure and note that they're looking at changes in that, even what they're talking about changing, which makes it difficult for us to calculate those. But the other thing that's important, and going back specifically to Wesley's question, we may have a mega COLA coming. They're talking about a potential even larger COLA that they would fund to school districts. And I think that goes back to your point. I don't remember what the number was that they were throwing out because They haven't done it for us in terms of our information from school services in California. The county had talked about it, and they were going to put that in the next round of iteration of the calculator. But again, I don't have that to look at it.
Yeah.
So that's coming.
Maybe as early as June, depending on what the election does, right?
Yes. And then one other thing that's in here is you'll see there's a proposed block grant. They're talking about giving districts a block grant, and they haven't really narrowed it down what you would use it for, but they're talking about up to $1,500 per student.
Regardless of whether you're a community versus.
Right now, yes.
But they haven't said what that grant might be for.
No.
Interesting.
And so I'm going to be bringing back more information and talking specifically about the May revise and also our budget in general at the next board meeting, and I'll bring some additional information. So I just wanted to make sure that we at least covered those things. I haven't included any of those in my budget. There's
And
still.
you're not going to change your budget, right, Chris? You leave it the way it is. You talk to us more about the 45 days revision in 2 weeks.
And this is why I was saying that in all likelihood, I'm going to be coming back with a 45-day budget revision.
Yeah.
Because those will be material, those could be a material.
It's not, will be.
Will be.
$1,500 per child will
That's
be.
massive.
Yeah.
That's a game changer.
Yeah.
Well, especially if we have to buy buses.
Which, by the way,
don't go there.
Stay on target. It's 9:40. We're not getting that conversation. Oh, this is a good one.
No.
The other thing that I wanted to point out is Extended Learning Opportunities Program, ELOP. And this is the best information that is available to us. And this was data provided by school services back in February. And the numbers may have changed, but it's not publicly available yet. So I just wanted to provide some information on what other districts in our county and entities in our county look like in terms of ELOP in challenges the Ross Valley School District is having. And what's important to note when looking at this is that you see some, if you look all the way to the right, the estimated revenues per ADA, you see some large dollar amounts. Some of those amounts, though, they're tied directly to your unduplicated pupil count, but it's also tied to, if you're a small entity like Nicasio is on here, they only have 30 kids that are in TK through 6th grade in terms of attendance, but they're guaranteed $50,000. And so as you look at it, they've got a really large amount per child. That might be still difficult for them to offer the program, but they're getting substantially more than the Ross Valley School District. We're shown down at 230, but I also did want to point out there are some others locally that are substantially higher that you'll note as you look at this. And so that does provide a challenge to the district, as there might be other districts in the county that find it easier to offer this program. And as we look at it moving forward, we'll be certainly evaluating if this is something that we can offer, and if we can, how do we fully implement it?
Helpful.
So,
yeah.
And with that, I know there were a lot of questions during, but are there any other questions?
I only have a question about the last slide is there a timeline that we have to be thinking about making decisions for the ELOP?
Initially, they told us at the June budget of last year that we were going to have to implement it in the current year. The governor then, you weren't even getting the revenue estimates. This came out in February. This is the first time that we actually officially saw what our number would look like. Mm-hmm. And so the governor was hearing complaints from districts up and down the state. We can't implement something. We don't know how much we're going to get. We're having trouble hiring people to fill these positions to begin with. And so those were the types of things. And so he did push it off a year. And so in theory, they would like us to push it forward and start it next year, but it's still difficult when you're just now starting to get the information. Again, February was the first time that we saw revenues like this. And so as we move forward, it's really something we would look to start and implement the following year. If it is something that we could push forward.
And in the meantime, we do need to write a plan.
In the
Right.
meantime, we
Even
could.
We need to have,
knowing.
so next year would be writing the plan with idea of implementing it the following year or something like that.
You do a good job at this, Chris. I'm gonna tell you, you make difficult stuff pretty easy to understand, and that's not an easy thing to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's nice work.
I think this is something we actually have to start formulating the plan.
Right now.
We would have to bring it to June.
June 14th.
Yeah.
June 14th, we'll start.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Doing the plan.
Okay, we'll see.
Julie and I
I'll do
will
plan in
become-
in a couple weeks.
Julie and I are going to become good friends.
Because we're not good friends until right now.
So we'll note that for our part of the agenda, future
Yeah.
board so that's a future board topic for the June. Okay.
They need to be approved, like, yeah.
That'll be on item.
Nice work, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
This meeting is always super intense.
They're highlighting.
See, a couple weeks with a whole new set of data.
Yes.
That's good.
Unfortunately.
But before call the public hearing is open, any public comment? Questions?
I may be confused, but last time we talked about the budget, we talked about the universal TK or kindergarten, and you explained that how that had affect the budget. I don't know if that was correct or not. Yeah, but you didn't mention that here, so.
It's built into, the figures are built in.
Okay.
Yes, and so we are moving forward with the implementation of the universal TK.
Okay. And that was part of the revenues, I think, that you
Yes.
showed us, where they drop off, but then they kind of come back up because we're adding that extra students in the TK.
But it's not fully implemented yet.
Okay.
The way the state is doing it, they're taking it in small increments. So
4
it's
years?
they're adding a few months worth of children each year until it's fully implemented.
Alright,
And that's built into our figures.
alright, thank you.
So now I will call the public hearing closed, and is there any other discussion or questions? All right, Ian, thank you very much. And we will see that item back on our agenda in June.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. I keep saying June, so it's like off in some
Gosh.
distant future. It's 2
Time
weeks
flies.
from now.
Time flies when you're having
June
fun.
is in 2 hours.
June is in 2 hours.
Let's do it tomorrow
Even
evening.
closer. Okay, so we're moving now on to section G, which is our consent actions. Does anybody have any, are there any questions or issues with the consent items? We have 5 consent items on here. Yeah. I'm not seeing any issues, so we can entertain
I'll
a
make
motion. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go out for public comment, if there's any public comment. Seeing no public comment,
I'll make a motion to
Watch out.
now I'll bring it back when we have a motion.
It's a high
I'll second.
pressure when you're the only
I
public person.
know. Motion and a second for consent actions. All right, and we'll vote. Go ahead. Brian?
Aye.
Wesley?
Aye.
Rachel?
Aye.
Shelley? Aye.
Marie, aye.
All right. All of the consent actions are approved. Item number H, board business. It says approximately 20 minutes. Can we do it in 10? These are committee updates and reports from trustees.
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report.
Well, I do have something to report. I want to make it really brief. It was the JLAC. The JLAC meetings are always happening the next day after we meet, so it's always 2 weeks delayed. So, but they were really talking a lot about the budget, to be honest. And since the budget has been published since then, there was a lot of excitement and notes around the budget in May. Something I want to point out that they discussed, and they said it as well at another meeting I attended, was the fact that at the same time that the May revise was published, they also published the trailer bills at the same time.
Trailer bills, yeah.
And the trailer bill is really how you implement the budget, and there is a lot of other stuff in that. And that, the fact that it's published at the same time, it shows that most likely a lot of things that is in the budget is going to be implemented. Right, so I think, and that's actually
Are they not
create-
always published at the
No.
same time?
No. And so I think there is just a lot of those conversations about as they are kind of getting there, it still doesn't give you more, you still can't necessarily implement them in your budget, but they're like, oh, that's interesting. They already tell you a little bit how to implement it. So just want to point that out as something that on the legislative conversation I'm hearing a lot about. And in general, what they were talking about is that both houses traditionally wait until they see the budget and then react. This time it's really the other way around. You have really certain of the houses are just going ahead and just express their strong opinion about different things. So this is a bit of an odd year. We will see how it pans out in 2 months when we see it all. And I'm kind of interested to see if it's going to win on that one. And on the Assembly House, definitely they care about the LCFF issues and how to fund. This is really the top priority. Versus on the Senate side, and I'm just going to kind of get to the chase here. On the Senate side, they care about the climate change, which goes into ... transportation. Pay attention to that, Wesley. That's why they're into the transportation. Because I'm always wondering, why is that the Senate is so big into keep talking about transportation and having transportation being a new mandate? Is because some of the priorities they have right now is really around the climate change. So that, when I heard that, I'm like, okay, bingo, that's what I was missing. I was kind of thinking the transportation on its own didn't really make sense, but with climate change, like, okay, let's keep an eye on that. And something we have not talked about, but that's true, is that there is no release on the pension cost and the pension liability. And that was definitely disappointment from everybody kept talking about it. The one thing that is not in the budget, and there was even 2 weeks ago, like even 2 weeks before May 20, they were talking about that, saying most likely we are not going to see anything there. So let's get ready for some disappointment, which we are in disappointment.
Are you talking about unfunded pension liability?
Mm-hmm.
They were gonna use some of the excess funding to fund some of the pension liability for districts, and they still feel like they're doing that.
Yeah.
Going back to that assumptions, you saw the increase in our pension costs, and what they would do is help buy down those costs, which then would free dollars up potentially for things such as salary.
That makes sense.
Or salary's not.
Exactly, no pension. So that's what I have for tonight. Keep it brief.
Right. Wesley? No? Rachel?
I went to the Parent Equity Task Force group meeting last week. It was a very productive meeting, I felt. There were updates on what's going on in the district, but then we, like Julie said, we all had parts of the REAP, like the Racial Equity Action Plan for the district, on pieces of paper, on really big pieces of paper. And we got to like put updates and things that we wanted to see added to it, kind of just work on amending it for next year. So we have a 2.0 version that's kind of group sourced like updates. Which was a really interesting and kind of actually fun project to work on, and it's just to see what everyone had ideas on. And we got to prioritize what we thought was most important of what other people had suggested. So it was a really good meeting, I think.
Yeah, my only other update, I'll echo what Julia, I went to that meeting, although virtual, which was a bummer because it looked like a really engaging meeting. So I just kind of got to watch everybody be engaged and then try and listen the best I could because I had to be down visiting with my daughter who's got health issues. But the one other part of it that I wanted to let all of us know about that came up in that meeting is that there will be a subgroup of the Parent Guardian Equity Task Force that's going to work with Rachel and I on drafting for a board policy, a board equity policy. So that'll be working over the summer, and then so we can expect to see that probably in the fall. That will come back to all of us, but
Not this summer. It'll be starting in the fall.
it'll be starting in the fall, right? Yeah, but we'll be seeing that. So that was all my update. Great.
Yeah.
That's board business. Superintendent and cabinet report.
Minutes.
Oh, did I miss the minutes? Sorry.
One more item.
One more item, approval of meeting minutes for May 10th. Does anybody have any amendments or was just not that long ago. No?
So I make a motion to approve the phone stop. To approve the minutes from May 10, 2022 meeting.
Okay.
Are there public comments on this or no?
What?
Are there supposed to be public comments on this or not? I don't remember.
Yes, actually. Any public comments on May 10th? For those of you who listen to them so closely, which I know you do. No. Okay.
We need to keep our
No
audience
public
engaged.
comments. No public comments.
Okay, so Anna,
So
can
we
I
have a
make
motion.
can I make a motion to approve the minutes from the May 10th meeting?
I will second that. Sorry for interrupting.
Motion, no, thank you. Gotta keep my key, write it on every little thing, public comment. Motion and a second, so vote.
Marie, aye.
Marie, aye. Rachel?
Aye.
Wesley?
I'll abstain, I couldn't make it.
Thank you. Brian?
Aye.
Shelley, aye. So we have approval of those minutes. Now we're on to the superintendent.
Okay, thank you. And Chris, do you have anything more from business services?
Only that I'm looking forward to all of the promotion ceremonies next week.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're right.
We have a number of them.
Absolutely. Anything student services, Eric?
Nothing additional, but for sure feeling that great energy towards the conclusion of the school year. And
Yeah.
we're also, of course, getting staffing in place for extended school year for our special ed students. So that's always a great crew. Really looking forward to that.
Mhm.
And that will start at the Monday after school gets out, June 13th. And that's it.
Thank you. And Julia, anything more from curriculum instruction or HR?
Nothing further.
All right, thank you. And given the hour and that a number of folks have covered what other committees or meetings that I've attended as well, I will say just to agree that the Parent Guardian Equity Task Force was, I thought, fabulous in terms of the collaboration and partnership in terms of developing, giving feedback to, and coming up with ideas to make our REAP 22-23. And then I did get to go to Manor's open house. That was really just fantastic. So I was glad to go to all of them. This year, unfortunately, I won't be joining. Those of you who will be attending the promotions, as you all know, I have a wedding to attend for a family friend's daughter in Italy. So I won't be here next week. And I did also go with Marie to the Marin County School Boards Association.
I forgot to mention
For
that.
me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What's there with
Year
you?
meeting, which was
Actually.
which is great, a nice activity there looking at continuing on with efficiencies and effectiveness in which districts can continue to partner with each other. And we had also, Julia and I held the Universal Transitional Kindergarten Parent and Teacher meetings. So to give us continued input into our expansion of our TK program, which not much will change for next year, but as we do expand it out with the 2 months addition every year until it becomes fully implemented for 4-year-olds in the 25-26 school year, it was just great to have the number of folks in attendance. So looking forward to that going on as well. So I think that's it.
All right. Then as far as item number J, future board topics, we know what we've got coming up here in 2 weeks in June. We've got a number of items that we know are showing up in that. And if there are anything else that comes up, as usual, come to Marcy or I, and we'll make sure, but do it quickly because it's coming up in 2 weeks. So, anything else for wrap up? Otherwise, that's a wrap at what, 9:58, 2 minutes before 10. So the meeting is adjourned.